Hello and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care, and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out about how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie couch with Chris Difford. Chris is a musician, best known as founding member, guitarist, and songwriter of the rock band Squeeze. Alongside continuing to write and perform with the band for over 30 years, Chris has hosted songwriting retreats and now hosts his own podcast, I Never Thought It Would Happen, where he talks with fellow musicians about the highs and lows of their careers. He's been nominated for a Grammy Award and has 2 Ivor Novello Awards. Chris Difford, welcome to On the Marie Curie couch.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
How are you?
Good. I'm relaxed.
Good. So, if it's okay with you, I would like to jump straight in and ask if you have experienced a significant bereavement in your life that you could talk about today.
Yeah, quite a few, really. I suppose one of the most devastating losses which came was losing my father. He was ill very quickly, seemingly, and he kind of was a tall man when I was a kid, very tall man. And then by the time he was in hospital, he was smaller than me. His bones had kind of taken the weight of his life, I think. And when he finally went into hospital with cancer of the bone, my brothers were with him and they were standing around the bed, and he gestured for me, and I was downstairs on the phone to my partner at the time. And when I came upstairs, I stood in the room with my brothers, and he looked at the 3 of us, and then he just went. It's like he had requested a farewell vision of us all, I guess. And I always remember the huff of his last breath being very poetic and beautiful. It wasn't something that I felt like I was going to cry my eyes out over. I was kind of happy for him in a way that he had gone to the next place, wherever the next place can be, I guess. And he'd lived a full life. He'd served as an officer in the Second World War. He'd worked all his life, saved every penny that he could to raise his kids. So it was quite significant to lose. It's always significant to lose a parent, but that particular loss was very, very visual and very thoughtful for me.
Had your dad had conversations with you and your brothers about his death when he was ill? And was that something that was spoken about in the family? Like death and dying?
No, death and dying wasn't talked about. It was a different generation, I think. This is different now, at least it is for me. I noted that when David Bowie died, I was heartbroken when he died, but his build-up to his death seemed like the last act of a play. He'd recorded a record in New York, and I know musicians who played on that record, and he didn't tell any of them that he was ill. So they recorded the album as if it was just a David Bowie record, I guess. And then when he died, he talked about it with his family, and he had very quickly been taken away, his ashes, and it was all done in a very private way. And I thought it was very inspiring that he knew he was going to leave and he wanted to do it on his terms.
Was that what inspires you about that? That he had control over that. It was on his terms. It's interesting, isn't it, that we can be inspired by something like that. I just kind of wonder what sits under that inspiration.
Well, I think death isn't something you talk about very often in family situations. It's pretty, it's like behind the curtain. You don't talk about what's behind the curtain. But I think as you get older, I'm 70 now, and it was a very significant birthday, although it's quite a young birthday in this day and age, 70. A lot of my contemporaries are 80s plus. It does make you think, well, what happens? You know, if you can plan your passing and how you'd like people to react to your life, I think that's valuable. And I think I would inspire people to give it some thought and to kind of write it down so that people know, because quite often it's up to the family to pick up the pieces, and that can be chaotic. It can also cause, I believe, misunderstandings about what that parent or that person may have wanted about their passing. So if you leave instructions, it can only guide people and help them. And I think funerals are, from what I've seen, very dark kind of places where people grieve. And I think people need to grieve, obviously. But in America, down in the South and in other countries, death is celebrated by music, by dance, by tears. It's all joined together, really. It's to assist that person into the next place. And I think that can be joyous. I'm not suggesting that for me one at all, but I'm suggesting that is quite a good way to leave.
And I think those different rituals and attitudes all impact on how we feel about death, and how we see it and what we think about it and what our beliefs about it are as well, actually. I mean, sort of faith and religion, but, what happens to us after we die. And I suppose that all impacts on how we face it and how we either celebrate or mourn it.
I agree. Every morning I walk my dog around the graveyard here where I live in the village. And I look at all the cold stones that go back hundreds of years and wonder what that all means, really. I don't really know how I feel about that. I think it forms a place where you can go and remember somebody, I guess, and put flowers and grieve. But you can do that anywhere. It's like my father's grave and my mother's grave, which are together in South London. I don't think I've visited in 25 years because I don't need to. I can just sit here and think about them, look at photographs, or remember times that we were together. I don't have to be in a graveyard to remember the loss. But and at the same time, a graveyard is a very beautiful place. People take a lot of time and effort to have their stones carved, and it's a place of sleep. And in our village, there was a young girl who sadly took her life a year ago, and her grave is beautiful. It's kind of not got a stone on it. It's just twigs and flowers, and for the family, that's a great place to go and remember her.
I think on times I've been in graveyards, I'm thinking of the graveyard where my mother is, and it's up in Newcastle. And so when I go back, not always, but sometimes I go there. And I'm always kind of struck by the community as well in the graveyard. So how other people, and
Yeah,
maybe this is just a Newcastle thing, but how other people who are there at their graves will chat on and ask why you're there and who you're there to see. And
yeah,
of
yeah,
course there's the community under the ground, because there's all
yeah,
these people who are next to each other, but then there's this kind of support, I suppose, in some ways as well for some people who, certainly the regulars, because some people will go often and get a lot of comfort from that and be able to share stories with people.
yeah. I never see anybody in our graveyard apart from our vicar Pete. But we are in the middle of a village in the middle of nowhere, so that's probably why.
Just going back to your dad's death, Chris, can I first of all ask if you're happy to share your dad's name?
My dad's name's Sidney.
Sidney. Thank you. After your dad died, I just want to ask a bit about your experience of grief and bereavement. And I'm aware that you said at the opening that there's been, many significant bereavements you've experienced. But can you tell me a bit about what, and especially I think for those listening who are grieving now and who tell us in letters when they write in that it's helpful when they hear other people's experiences of grief sometimes because there might be some top tips in there on what works or how they manage it or what things help them. But also, I think just ultimately hearing other people's stories can make you feel less isolated and less alone. And I just wondered if you can say a bit about what your experience of grief and bereavement's been.
Well, my dad, I took my knowledge of songwriting and wrote a song about him. And that was a way that I found a cathartic way of honoring his life by writing it down as a lyric and having it put to music and then putting it on a record. It was very important to do that, I felt. A song called Sydney Street. And it's about his life in the war and what I think he meant when he didn't want to talk about it. It was quite significant, I think, that he never wanted to talk about the war. And why would he? He used to say, I don't want to talk about it. I used to see my mates getting blown up. Why would I want to talk about that? So it's fair enough. So I wrote a song about that. And I think for people who are experiencing loss, grief, writing is very important because it channels the subconscious that you don't normally tap into when you're having a conversation or when you're thinking. The subconscious comes by connecting words, I think, on a piece of paper more than anything. And to let that flow is joyous, it's very important. It's whether you write down what you thought of that person or you try and write a poem or, a drawing, just being connected, pencil to paper, connects you to the subconscious and it connects yourself to the grief that you're feeling. For me, I think that's the way I deal with most of my life anyway. As a writer, I'm very lucky like that. I can put down in words how I feel. And then when they become songs, that's even deeper, and people get to share in my feelings and seem to like them. So that's quite good.
I'm interested in that process of writing and having something visual, in words, either on a screen or on some paper or some art. And then I've heard other people say that there isn't necessarily a desire to keep going back to it and or even reading it again. I mean, I suppose if it becomes a song, then you're going back to it lots if you're singing it. But is there something in that it's kind of a one-off almost, if that makes any sense, that getting it out, the benefits of that, certainly from a grief point of view, happen while you're doing it, so you're not necessarily writing something to keep going back to like a gravestone.
Yeah. Quite often in counseling, you're asked to write something about a situation or a person or a feeling and then discard it at the end. And I think that's kind of a nice thing to do. I've done that a few times in my life where I've written about somebody or a feeling, and then I've taken that piece of paper and discarded it, and it's gone. And gone with it are those feelings sometimes. It's a cathartic way of dealing with feelings and possible anxiety around relationships. I think it's really good to whether you're good, bad, or indifferent at writing, just taking part in that process can really help. But also, sitting with a friend and talking is really important. There's the wonderful thing about Ricky Gervais's TV program which leans on the passing, is the two people sitting on a park bench talking about their grief, not in a humorous way, but in a very open and loving way. And I think to share with someone, even a stranger, like you say, you meet strangers in a graveyard, and you can talk to them and dive deep into why you respect and why you miss the person that you're there to think about and to love.
I think one of the lovely things as well about the park bench conversations in Ricky Gervais's Afterlife is the fact that when you're sitting on a park bench next to somebody, you don't have to look them in the face or in the eye. You can both look straight forward and look ahead. Like if you're in a car and you're driving and someone's next to you, they're great times to have some of those more difficult conversations because they feel less intense because you don't have to do the eye contact thing.
It could be true. I can understand that. Yeah, definitely.
Will I ever stop missing them? How will I face going to his funeral? If you're missing someone, support is only ever a phone call away. We're here to help anyone affected by terminal illness or bereavement with our free, confidential and friendly support line or web chat services. It's available in over 200 languages and Relay UK. We can give you a listening ear or chat about longer term phone support. We can also give you information over the phone or direct you to find it on our website and order it in print. Visit our website at mariecurie.org.uk/support or call our support line now to find out more.
So writing and talking to close friends, is there anything else that's helped you in grief?
I can't say that I've spent a long time being in grief. It's a process that has its time and its place. And then I think you have to say, okay, this is what life is about. Life is about death, in a way. You're born, you do what you can, and then you go. You can't be here forever. You can be here forever in people's minds, but not in reality. So, songwriting is very important for me because I can get my feelings down and get the songs across. There's a song called Some Fantastic Place, which is one of Squeeze's best songs, and that's written about a girl called Maxine, who was really the person who brought Glenn and I together as songwriters 50 years ago. She was a wonderful spirit, and she opened up her arms and built a nest for the two of us to write songs in. She was beautiful in so many ways. And then she had cancer, and she worked very, very hard to find a way of dealing with it through spirituality and through focusing and diet and all sorts of ways. And then eventually she kind of had less and less time, and she was aware of that. And she called me and asked me to go and sit with her in her garden in the country where she lived. And I went and sat in the garden with her. And my head was all over the place. I looked at her and I thought, my God, she doesn't look well at all. But she made me feel very comfortable. And then she said, there's a couple of things I need to share with you about my feelings, about what I think your journey in life could be. And at that time, I was drinking. At that time, I was in a difficult relationship. And she just laid it out on the couch for me. And I kind of was blown away with how bold and honest she was. And when I got in the car to leave, I thought, wow, that's the most beautiful thing, but what can I do? And anyway, somehow I managed to put into action all the things that she had shared with me. I ended up in rehab, and strangely enough, not strangely enough, but in a poetic way, she passed away when I was in rehab. So it was a really amazingly emotional drawing of the bringing together of the circle. I sorted my relationship out that was troubling me. She said I should also venture out more as a songwriter and write with other people, because at that time I was only writing with Glenn. I was petrified of writing with other people. I just didn't have strength to do that. I was too scared. I just didn't think I was good enough. And after the rehab time that I had, it really invigorated me, and I started to reach out. And ever since then, I've been writing with lots of different people, and I find it second nature, thanks to her.
I'm really moved by that story. And I was just thinking about, I'm making an assumption, and that my guess was that it was Maxine's honesty. And maybe that's the woman she was, and that's how she always was, whether she was dying or not. But the words, so, because I think there's something in that where she could see something in you and for you. But I wonder if she hadn't been dying, whether she'd have been able to say those things, and whether we can say those things to people around us. And I think there's something in that bit, isn't there, about that ability to actually say it and voice it because you heard it.
Yeah, what a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an incredible gift, to part that information. And at first I was thinking, what is she challenging me, or what's she saying? But actually, it was incredible. A gift, an incredible gift.
I'm going to change tack a bit and ask you if you ever think about your own death, Chris.
Well, as I said, I just turned 70, and when I was walking through the graveyard with my dog, I was thinking, well, is this, I should prepare myself for this journey without the dog at some stage. And I did think about it. I've not really gone deeply into it because I feel fit and healthy, and I feel like I have lots to do. But as I've already said, I think it's good to make sure that people around you are comfortable when you pass, that they know that you've thought about it and you've almost designed a passing for yourself, a safe place for them to be missing you and grieving you. And, I think the old fashioned, sometimes you hear about people being like, well, what has he left me? What's he left me in his will? I don't think that exists in true love. I think in true love in a family, that's the last thing you think about. I think you think about, well, it's like when my dad died, I went round to his house. My brother said to me, you can take anything you want, I just thought, well, actually, I don't want anything. Why should I want to take anything from, like, why would I want any of his ties or, any of the furniture? Why would I want that? I've got memories, and he said, do you want to take the fish tank? I said, no, I don't want to take the fish tank. It's too much of a responsibility. Take a tropical fish tank. I can just sit in my office here and close my eyes, think about my dad if I really want to. And you don't have to have things to remember people. I have my mother's Bible, and I think that's all I've got of both my parents.
Yeah, and I think, that story, just of that interaction between you and your brother when your dad died, kind of what we know certainly through our work, is that everybody, even in the same family, will respond differently to a death and will want and need different things. Yeah. And we talk about this a bit on this podcast, but often people's responses to a death are directly linked to the relationship they had with the person who's died. And of course, me, I've got one brother, but me and my brother inevitably had different, we're 4 years apart, but we inevitably had different relationships with our parents, because all children do have different relationships with their parents. And then when the parent dies, they're a bit like, well, why are we grieving in different ways, or why do we have different attitudes towards this? Well, to start with, we're different people and we've lived different lives, but also we had different relationships with those individuals, so we're having a different experience of grief. But that's hard sometimes in families, because sometimes it's a cause of conflict in families as well. If people might think somebody's not grieving enough or too much, or
Yeah, I've witnessed that on several occasions, and it's not very nice. But as you say, everybody's different. They grieve differently. They have different perspectives on passing, and you can only inspire people to think differently. I think as generations change, people are being more open-minded about it, I think, than before. When I see younger people passing, there's a different kind of look about their passing than generations before. My parents, their parents, my grandparents, very, very cold lives, brought up very early and didn't live long because of cancer or one thing or another. And people are living longer now, obviously, because things have changed. And so, I think it sounds like it could be a really dark and sour conversation, but it doesn't have to be at all. I think the fact that we're talking about it openly is good news. But we're coming at it from a slightly different angle.
is legacy something that's important to you, as in how you'd like to be remembered?
No, not really. I mean, sometimes I think, I'll be remembered as that bloke who sang Call for Cats. Sometimes I think things like that. But, I think just to be remembered is good enough. It doesn't have to be a fanfare of respect. It can just be, well, he was a good bloke, or he made his mistakes, he did this, he did that, that kind of thing. I think it affects family more than it does people beyond family. I think my legacy is my family, and how beautiful the children are, and how beautiful my wife is, and how proud I am of all the songs that I've written. I mean, I'm extremely proud of those. Good, bad, or indifferent. They're all my children in some ways. And, the performances that we do as a band, whenever I'm on stage, I always think, well, this is my legacy, really, being here in front of people that really love the lyrics that I've written, to see people singing the words that I've written. That's all that I need for the rest of my life, is to acknowledge that fact and to call those people in. They are my friends. They bought a ticket, they've come to the show, but they become my friends because we're joined by that conversation, that lyrical conversation, which is something I'm extremely proud of.
Thank you. I was just thinking of the sort of full circle you talked about earlier, in your after the conversation with Maxine, and yeah, just thinking about the sort of full circle of the songwriting process. I'm guessing I've never written a song in my life, but the songwriting process and being with all of those friends who are singing your words back to you. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing.
It is. It's a spiritual feeling, but I've only got recently to observe that in recent years. It was when you're younger and you're on stage, you don't really, or I didn't really consider it as anything other than just having a laugh. But now, 50 years of being on the road is extraordinary, really, and to have those feelings about people, and what that means, it's extraordinary, really. And despite all the rubbish that goes on in the background sometimes with, personalities, egos, or whatever, it still is the greatest feeling on earth, is to walk on stage and to know that this is where your journey is. It's almost like walking into the graveyard. It's kind of like, yeah, this is okay. I'm not worried about this at all. This is amazing.
I've just got a couple of more questions. One is there anything you wanted to say on this podcast today when you were thinking about it before you came on that I've not asked you or that we've not talked about?
No, not, I just got back from a dog walk around the graveyard, and I was thinking about this this podcast and what I was going to say, and I was looking at some of the stones and people's names on them, and how simple that is, and how cold it looks, but how beautiful it looks. And I suppose, they say that the roots of trees get to touch each other underneath the ground, and that's how they communicate. And maybe in a graveyard, all those people that are under the ground connect via nature, and maybe they're having like the greatest time. Maybe they've got the greatest gig on earth. We just don't hear it.
Definitely. My last question, how has it been today being on the Marie Curie couch and having these types of conversations?
Well, it's been wonderful, actually. And I run my own podcast, and I often find questions difficult to ask, but I felt very comfortable talking about this. And I hope people get something from it. I don't know what, but it's kind of just the conversation, really. It's a conversation that you can share and people can take away from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Christopher, thank you for joining me on the Marie Curie couch today. Thank you for sharing a bit of Sidney's story, telling a little bit of Maxine's, and it's been a joy to meet you.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Have a great day.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help, from planning ahead to coping with bereavement. You can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 090 2309 or search Marie Curie online. This podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Content. The music featured is Time Lapse by Pan Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.